We're doing something significant, something that's been needed for a while, and we're getting things right. Still a long way to go, though. And I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call and within the organisation who could point us in those directions, but we will continue to listen. A couple of system developments as well. And there's both South East London to help us decide on the population health requirements and the needs of our population, to almost act as a kind of semi-campaigning body for South East London, really, to help us understand where we need to address inequity in access of and provision of services across health and social care. There'll be an NHS ICS board, which will have a much more specific function around allocation of resources. And we're just working through what representation on that board looks like. And then there'll be a really big emphasis on the importance of place within that. So there'll be 6 place-based organisations with it. You know, we've got really strong relationships already in Bexley and Greenwich and Bromley, and they'll be sort of turbocharged in the context of the board. And we're just working through what that's going to look like. And there's some guidance published yesterday on it. And then provider collaboratives are being a great deal of emphasis. What that means is that non-executive directors, exec directors and governors are going to go through a period of, I think, considerable existential reflection about our role in this new world. Because what it is doing is creating some quite different balances of power, of the ability to allocate resources and responsibility for delivery within the system, with, I'd have to say, a very welcome focus on population health and public health. But it will also be tough, I think, for some of our organisations to move away from traditionally quite powerful places and positions within the sort of health and social care infrastructure, and effectively agree to let some of that power be managed in a more open and democratic way that might see, you know, there's no sense in which you can make everyone a winner in a system that's rationed. You know, there will be winners and losers in this, and the extent to which people who have been historically seen as winners are prepared to perhaps to feel a little bit more like losers in the interest of supporting other parts of the system that perhaps had a much tougher time on funding over the last 5 to 10 years is going to be very significant. Our chair for the ICS is Richard Douglas, who's a hugely experienced public sector figure and civil servant. You know, he's meeting with Andy, talking to me. You know, we're in regular conversation, and they are very much, let's see the legislation and understand what it means for us. But the whole concept of partnership and place is going to be turbocharged over the next 6 months. I'd have to say Oxley's as a trust has partnership in its blood in a way that nowhere else in the NHS has. And as a result, I think we're fairly well placed to engage with this. But the next 2 or 3 years could be, it'll go one way or the other. It'll either be quite disappointing because what we'll end up with is a bunch of new structures that just replicate the commissioning provider system and don't really challenge the established sources of power and resource within the NHS. Or we might see some of this guidance and this new structure allow us to really liberate some of the capability there is within, for example, public health, to address things like the diabetes time bomb we've got, and to move away from a position we're in at the minute, which is seeing the acute system in physical and mental health gradually overwhelmed by increasing demand, and actually allocating some resource to try to get upstream of that. And you know, and that can only be done by moving away from an annual financial settlement into a system that's confident to invest in multi-year public health investment to really try to change people's health outcomes before they get to the point of needing acute and crisis care. So there we go. I think that was a fairly full update this week. I'm happy to take questions.
Well, Matthew, thank you. I'll let you share it. You've got Ray and then John. Matthew.
Sure, that's Ray.
Hi, thank you very much, Matthew. That was very comprehensive and very clear. Just want to ask you about the ICS. When I was on the commissioning side a few years ago, we had OZEL, the South, the SDP, and sometimes, even though I was on the board of a commissioning group, it really wasn't clear where decisions were being made and what was coming down to the CCG. You just felt in a fog. I remember going through these streets at times, seeing these battalions of people working for the SDP. What on earth are they doing? So I just wonder, with the ICS, how can we ensure that the really great governance that's in place for Oxley's, you know, the membership, the council governors, the board, etc., how can all that retain its integrity and stay on top of what's happening both for Oxley's but more widely within the South East London ICS? Thank you.
So I recognise the fog, and you know, and I always think if you want to see where the real decisions are made, watch the meetings your director of finance goes to. the things they don't. But that's a sort of general rule of thumb, because a lot of this comes down to resourcing. And lots of the actual quiet power in the NHS does tend to sit where the allocations of money goes. So it's easy to look at all these new structures and look at this guidance and say, oh, here we go again, and nothing's going to change, and etc. But the challenge for people like me and for groups like us is actually to say, there is a genuine desire, I think, on behalf of policymakers and the senior team at NHSEI, for this not to be the 2012 Act all over again, and just to dress up the same power structures in a different guise. I think COVID has given us all a real opportunity to reflect on how we work. And there's been some partnership working in the notion of doing a council of governors on Teams. If we suggested this to you 18 months ago, you'd have thought it was bizarre. Lots of the ways we work now, the fact that people often routinely defer now to digital as a way of speaking to people, rather than getting on the train and travelling up to Denmark Hill and back and losing 4 hours of the day for a meeting with David Bradley. These kinds of things have now become commonplace, to the point where, frankly, I'd rather see a lot less of Teams. And we've managed to achieve a huge period of transformational change in a short period of time. So there's things we can capitalise on. What Richard Douglas would say to us, look, this will not be done by any other group than the group of leaders in South East London. If we decide to allow it to lapse into old behaviours again, that's where it will end up. I think we, as a unitary board and as the Council of Governors in Oxleas, we need to engage with open eyes, but with a desire to take this, in the way it's been presented to us, as an opportunity to try to change some of these power structures, Ray. Beyond that, the content of the legislation will be very significant. Because what that says about foundation trusts, what that says about the future, will be a very important factor in how those power dynamics roll out. But for now, I think we need to keep eyes open, take part in the discussions, and try to shape them to the best possible effects. And I suppose I'm constantly urging myself and my colleagues to, don't give in to cynicism. It's quite easy for me to sit there and say to Richard Douglas, I wouldn't do it like that. It's entirely within his gift to turn around to me and say, well, you tell me what you would do. And that's the position I'm in at the minute. If I'm going to criticise anything, I'm going to try to criticise it because I've got a better idea. And if I can't come up with a better idea, I'll try and make what we've got work.
All right. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Got John Crowley.
Matthew, can I just ask a question really around COVID-19 and Oxley staff? I mean, is there a number of Oxley staff who are impacted by long COVID? And in terms of their employment, are they returning part-time, full-time, or not at all? Or is there any other support the Audit Trust needs to consider?
Yeah, John, I'll look to see if Rachel or Jane could help me with that. So, because I do know we keep a close eye on the numbers of staff who are affected, but I'm not sure if we've got I know a number of staff who are affected by long COVID who we're supporting. I don't know if we're keeping a run in total.
Yeah.
I don't know if Rachel or Jane's available to help.
Hi, Matthew. I am, but I can see Ian's got his hand up, and I think he's actually got the definitive data. But actually, we have a small number of people with long COVID, a small number who are off sick, who are being supported. But I imagine that's why Ian stuck his hand up very quickly, because I do think he may have the numbers in front of him. I'm hoping he does.
Thank you. My hands are not working properly because I can't see Ian. So, but Ian, do you want to pull me out of the hole here?
Yeah, indeed. So I'm just getting the data in front of me, and I do know it's very small numbers, John, but I would like to give you the definitive number.
It's 3.
3, there we go.
Yeah,
there we go. So how many executive directors does it take to find the COVID number? There's the answer. More than we have staff affected by long COVID. So thank you. Thanks, Ian. Cheers. So, it's a nasty business. I talked to one of our older adults liaison staff, and she's fit as a fiddle. She had COVID last March, and as of 2 months ago, when I spoke to her, we're still seeing a neurologist, a dermatologist, and her GP, and was on a fairly heavy wad of medication. So I think it's those cases that really make you think. When I hear these Egypts saying it's just a cold on social media or whatever, you say, do you know what, for most people it will just be a short-term illness, but it's not something we want to spread unchecked. John, was there anything else you wanted to ask about that?
No, thanks, Matthew. That's all.
Cheers. I can see Janice's hand and then Patrick. So I'll go to Janice and Patrick, and then if there's other hands I'm missing, can someone let me know? Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Representing Bexley Care staff, I've just was talking about the new way that you're doing your directorates. I'm just asking whether we're still moving forward with the integration with the Bexley Care model.
Yeah, we've spoken to Bexley about this because we didn't want to lose the progress we've made on Bexley Care, and they're still keen for us to proceed with the Section 75 arrangements we were discussing, whereby we will see some of the services in Bexley continue to move to closer integration. And I think we've managed to do it in a way where we're hopefully not going to lose some of the real benefits we've got there. We'll also recognise that we do still have some teams that are very, very small on a borough-by-borough basis. I remember meeting the Wound team, I think, in my first week at Oxley's when we were just going through the Bexley Care move, and I think they had 4 members of staff, one of whom was funded by Bexley and 3 by Greenwich. Someone do correct me, folks, if I've got the numbers wrong, but it was a very, very small team, and they said, look, splitting us up doesn't make sense. We support each other, we cover for each other's holiday, we get peer clinical support from each other. You know, the specialist cardiac team, you know, the neuro rehab teams, there's been a number of them who've said it's made life quite difficult for them. So I'm hoping we can support them with some of that sort of critical mass stuff without losing the gains we've made through Bexley Care. But certainly, after some initial concerns, I think we've been able to reassure colleagues on the Bexley local authority side that that relationship is only going to become more important for us, and that we hope we can try to maximise the benefits of that, while also supporting the whole trust to manage quality and safety in the best possible way.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Janice. And then Leslie, of course. Sorry, I saw Patrick, but it's you. Hi, Leslie.
Yeah, it was to do with the collaborative working, and you were saying about the difficulties that I've been with the trust 9 years now, and you're the 3rd CEO. And in that time, I've seen the change and the growth and the development. And I think that the working relationships on the board and the committees and the way everybody works together, I've got great confidence in that. And about moving that into SLP and the CIS, I think that there's a strength there, and that yous are best placed for taking that forward, because I think yous have developed such a good working practice between you that strength on those other boards can strengthen them. And I think that you can really develop with the NHS so that it does work, and that the financial structure and the things that you've learned, I think you can take that forward and help others. I think it will be difficult because of the different personalities. And I just wonder, do you have a strategy for that, or do you feel it is purely relational and working together and understanding different characteristics and personalities within people in that group?
There's a bit of everything there, isn't there, Leslie? I mean, we're in a position where a number, you know, if Ian is now, I think, the regional lead chief operating officer for the Cavendish Square Group, which is all the mental health trusts in London. Iffy is on the London People Board. So he's the South East London representative on the London-wide People Board, looking at workforce development across London. Azra is a very active member of the Director of Finance group from South East London. You know, and I could run through the exec and point to ways in which all of us are sort of deeply embedded, really, in trying to make these both South East London structures work, the South London structures through the SLP, and in a number of our cases, regional structures as well. So I think Oxley's, you know, before I came to Oxley's, partnership didn't really mean anything other than somewhere to escalate concerns to. And I think all too often that's what it's viewed at in the NHS. You know, it's somewhere you can go to when pressure gets on and you need someone to pull some patients out of a ward or whatever. I think actually at Oxley's, it's always seen as a way in which you can collaborate with others to improve patient care, improve service user experience by delivering things together. So I think our tactic at the minute, I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable strategy when you don't know quite what the future holds, to say we will continue to be a good partner. We'll continue to make sure we're at the right tables and contributing positively to the discussions. But if I can be a bit colloquial about it, we need to make sure we don't get mugged in the process. Because, you know, this organisation is a good, strong organisation with a very solid backbone, a good culture. It's in financial balance. You know, as of this week, entirely rated good by the CQC in terms of our service lines as well. You know, we do things well here, and what I'd hate to see is that the strength of Oxley's was diminished as a result of being pulled into alliances with other organisations that maybe don't have quite the same set of values and motivations, or the same rigour in things like their oversight of financial recovery plans and so on. You know, it's always easy to sit in someone else's chair and say, look, it's hard. You know. So I'm not throwing rocks at our neighbours here, etc. But I think Oxley's has got something special about it that's worth protecting. We do have things like the Lewisham and Greenwich Trust partnership, which has really developed over the last 18 months or so, the SLP. You know, I think we've got a lot of reasons to be positive about the position we're taking, but there is a strategy, Leslie. We're a good partner, we're at the right tables, but we're not going to do anything, I think, that allows the organisation to get damaged in the process. And I think for now, that's the best.
That's very reassuring. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthew. We go on now to item 5, the increased demand on services, and Ian Diamond, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to read the paper that was included in the bundle. I'm just going to go through at a fairly high level how the pandemic has impacted on demand and capacity in terms of mental health for adults and children, but also our adult community physical health services. So for adult mental health, the early part of the pandemic last year saw a reduction in referrals to community services, and as a result a reduction in attendances in ED and therefore admissions. But I think from last summer that demand rose and has certainly been back at pre-COVID levels since last autumn. So I'm talking about the adult mental health services here. Having said that, for our adult mental health occupied bed days, these have reduced from April last year to April this year. But there is still a little bit of a gap between demand and capacity, and we often experience these surges in demand. So we try and meet that in the short term by trying to commission surge capacity. But we have a number of plans in place to address demand and capacity issues in the medium and the long term. So just to run through some of those plans, we have investment coming into community mental health teams for adults, which will help increase capacity, and that's going to be around about £6 million. We have an opportunity with the development of primary care networks to work differently with primary care to try and meet more need there. And we're also looking to strengthen the crisis offer to avoid admission in the first place. And then lastly, in terms of kind of a fundamental focus, that's on trying to reduce and more importantly, reduce the variation in length of stay when people are in hospital. For our CAM services, there's been a similar pattern in terms of demand, but just as a kind of further detail, in terms of the crisis presentations, these I think the people who are presenting with much more complexity, and because of that, the number of contacts that we're putting in place to meet that higher degree of complexity is far more. But again, like adult mental health services, there's significant extra funding coming into CAMS, around £2.5 to £3 million. So for both adult and children's mental health services, I'm working very closely with the directors and their teams to put plans in place to ensure that the funding that comes in is utilised well. Those are conversations that, of course, are being had in conjunction with partners in each of the 3 boroughs, and that's critical in terms of the integrated nature of the way that we work, not only with local authority but with primary care as well, and with our acute partners, particularly in terms of that demand and how it manifests itself in accident and emergency. So moving on to our adult community services, so these are our physical health services. What we're trying to do in adult community health services, we've kind of badged as home first. And this is a partnership approach that we have put in place over the last year with both local authorities in Greenwich and Bexley, but also the third sector. And really, at the beginning of the pandemic, we received national direction on how community services should be operating. And the focus during the pandemic has really been around supporting a reduction in demand on our local acute hospitals by keeping people out of hospital and facilitating speedier discharge. And we, like other providers, have benefited from some short-term funding, and we've delivered this very, very successfully. And that's indicated, I think Matthew talked about this perhaps earlier on, that for the winter, QEH ED was the top performing ED in South East London. So I think there's been some really successful partnership working across Bexley and Greenwich between us and other providers to deliver some really innovative practice that has really benefited the wider system. But unlike the story with mental health, unfortunately, the financial allocation for the rest of this year has not been quite what we hoped. And that also needs to be borne in mind in the context of local authority finances being pretty challenged at the moment. But what myself and other colleagues are doing is to use our current system group, which has been operating across Bexley and Greenwich since last year. We meet twice a week. We've been using that forum to prioritise the funding that we will be receiving this year to where it is best, we can kind of get the best return on it. But and there's some, it gives you some detail in the papers, because of the need to prioritise services during the pandemic, and effectively having to stand down certain services to service the need to kind of keep people out of hospital. It has meant that for some of our community physical health services, we have longer waits than we would like. And one of the examples that's given in the paper is around our neuro rehabilitation services. We're trying to, we're doing some work currently across what's called the Community Provider Network. So this is a network of providers of community physical health services in South East London to clarify what our core offer is against the various services. So neuro rehabilitation being one of those. And again, there's some detail of that in the paper. And we're working out locally how we prioritise the investment that we've got available, as I say, to get the kind of greatest impact. But overall, for our community physical health services, there are some significant challenges in terms of investment, and we are having to ask a lot of our teams and members of those teams, and they have been fantastic, I would say, in terms of stretching themselves and adapting to this kind of the changing context that the pandemic has thrown up. So we've got plans for, as I say, to how we will utilise what funding we have got for this coming year. And we have got access to kind of shorter term pots of money, which we can use. But really, this is going to be a long-term conversation, probably over 2 or 3 years to get us to where we need to be in terms of the money. So I was going to stop there. Very happy to take questions on anything you want to ask.
I can't see any there, Ian. Thanks ever so much for everything you're doing. There's a huge demand at the moment for everybody. And I think the staff have done brilliantly well under amazingly tough circumstances. If we can then go on to the Oxley strategy. How are we going to do this, Rachel? What's the plan?
I'm going to kick off if that's all right, Andy.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Right, so I'm going to try and put some slides up. I'd be grateful if you could let me know if they are up. Are you able to see those?
Yep. Yes.
Thanks very much. That's great. Okay, so hello everyone. So I'm going to talk to you today about one of the big priorities in our strategy, and that's about making Oxley's a great place to work. And hopefully you all know me, but I'm Rachel and I'm responsible for strategy and people. So in terms of the background to our strategy, it's just worth remembering where it all came from. So if you go back a year, all of the new strategy has its firm foundations in the work that we did last year, the Our Next Step work, and that you as governors played such a really big part in. There were those closer to home events. There were a range of different engagement events actually, but the closer to home events were particularly good. Those events that we had in local communities, and you all played a really big part in that. So as we were designing that strategy, we also took into account all the things that have changed over the last 18 months that have been brought about by COVID. Some things that have got us thinking differently and sometimes accelerated some of the changes that we wanted to make, for example, providing some of our services digitally. So what we did was we brought it all together and we really wanted it to be clear and focused as a strategy. So we didn't want it to try and cover absolutely everything in the kitchen sink. We wanted to make sure that we had 3 really clear big priorities. So the first is around achieving 0 delays. The second's around delivering great out of hospital care. And the one I'm going to talk to you today about is about making Oxleys a great place to work. So that's the focus. And just a reminder about why this is so important. We're here to deliver really high quality, and we will only do that if we are able to keep and retain the very best people. And it's within a context that all of you know, but is that there is such fierce competition for NHS staff. And the way that we can really stand out as an employer of choice will make all the difference to our ability to retain and keep the best staff. And we've been reflecting recently. So some trusts, and we have, for example, for Wandsworth Prison, tried some really kind of flashy recruitment drives where we've done marketing. None of those things have had the impact that we have hoped that they have had. And what we know is that the way to keep and get the best staff in the NHS is all about having a really good offer, about investing in staff in terms of supporting staff and in terms of having a great culture, because we know that people will stay if that's what we offer, and they will also tell their friends in other trusts that that's the sort of organisation Oxleys is, and those people will be more likely to apply. So that's why it's really important that we really focus on making Oxleys a great place to work. So there is a huge amount going on in this area, and I'm only going to touch on some of those highlights. I know that Nina has also spoken to you about some other areas, but the areas I'm going to focus on today are there's about 5 things that I want to highlight. So the first is around our new values. So when we spoke to staff, they really did not like our old values. I remember Iffy telling me straight away, fix the values, Rachel, they're not as they need to be. They're a bit dull, they're a bit repetitive, and people couldn't remember them. And we wanted to design values that people really felt spoke to them and spoke to the heart of what Oxleys is all about. And also that they could apply whatever they were doing. So in their work with patients, in their work with their colleagues, that it would be something that would apply in a whole range of different scenarios. So our new values, we're kind, we're fair, we listen, and we care. See, the feedback we're getting from staff is that these hit the mark. And they're supported by a behaviours framework, because we don't just want to have these nice kind of lofty ambitions in terms of our values. We want them to be practical. We want them to make a difference on the ground. And our staff survey tells us that we're not where we want to be when it comes to things like bullying and harassment, and when it comes to equality and inclusion. And that's something I'll be talking about. But these behaviours try and really pin down what the behaviours that we want everyone to be showing, and the behaviours that we don't want them to be showing as well, because we think that's really important. So hopefully they're going to be playing a really big part in recruiting the right people, retaining the right people, and creating a more inclusive culture. You've stolen all my best lines about building fair at Oxleys, but it's been the anniversary of it over the last year, and hopefully you've seen in the pack this visual which highlights some of the more practical changes that have happened over the last year. And the reason that we've done all of this is that people spoke to us and were very open and patient and honest about the experiences in Oxleys that they've had, which we need to fix for the future. And that's what's driven this big programme of work, which is only just starting. So we've made progress, but we are not there. We are currently in the foothills of what is a very big mountain to climb. So there's much more we want to do. There is work we really need to do to fix our disciplinaries and the overrepresentation of Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff in our disciplinaries. We want to be clear about how everybody can play a part in this agenda and that it's not just for being driven by our Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff. And as Matthew said, we also want to open it up more widely. We want to look at the experience of our LGBTQ plus staff, of our women within the organisation, of the men within the organisation as also, and our disabled staff and people who have lived experience of mental health issues. There are a range of things we want to do to make sure that particular groups feel included and don't feel as though they're having a poorer experience. So, our staff networks play a really big part in that. And over the last year, they have been brilliant in terms of reaching out to their communities, people who've often felt really isolated through COVID, and created that real sense of community. And the BAMEX network has done a huge amount on that. The LGBTQ plus network has too. It's now added the Q to its title, and the Disability Network. And I also just want to highlight our two slightly evolved networks. So Matthew mentioned that the Mental Health Staff Network has grown and grown and has become an even more inclusive and broad network for everyone who wants to talk and explore issues around their own mental health. And we've also introduced a new women's network. Our staff assemblies. So they were launched with this title. So all of our directorates have a staff assembly, and the idea is that they're given £10,000 a year to focus on things that will make a real difference in their local area on health and well-being and things that will really make a difference for local staff. So we launched them back in February with this title, Let's Assemble, and quickly had to lock down. So they've been absolutely brilliant in terms of thinking differently. So all of the town hall type discussions that we were envisaging for these staff assemblies, obviously all had to be put on hold, but they've been really creative and thoughtful about how they've taken this work forward throughout the pandemic. And we're also thinking about making sure that our new services, our new service director structures work for our new staff assemblies as well. Very finally, I just wanted to talk to you about a new innovation that we have within Oxley's, and I think Matthew's talked to you about before, and that's our shadow executive. And that's a group of 12 really talented Oxley staff who join together every month to have a look at our exec papers and bring fresh thinking and challenge. So they get to see the papers, the same papers that go to the formal executive meeting. They meet in private to discuss them. And then they meet on the following Monday with Matthew, with me, with Sally and other members of the exec to give us their thoughts on the papers. And they are brilliant. They bring so much insight from the front line and they really challenge our thinking. And then Matthew and Sally and I and others feed back their thoughts into our formal executive discussions. And what it does is it just brings really different, fresh thinking to us as an organisation and helps us to guard a bit against groupthink. And it's an innovation that lots of people in NHS London are really interested in, so you might see this idea spreading. So Andy, that's all I was going to cover. It's only some of the work that we're doing to make Oxley's a great place to work, but hopefully it gives you a flavour of the direction of travel. Nina, did you get to come in at all?
Yeah, Rachel, thank you so much. I mean, there's a brilliant amount of work that you've done there, and you and your team is really, really impressive. Thank you. Are there any questions for Rachel at all? I can't see anything at the moment. Nina, please.
Not a question for Rachel, Andy, but I just wanted to say I'm fortunate enough to sit on 4 boards, of which Oxley's is one. The other 3 are national, and Oxley's is the one board where we put the most amount of genuine strategic thought into the workforce agenda. We punch way above our weight, which I hope came out in some of the slides that Rachel presented in terms of the care, in terms of the innovative ideas that go into some of these really difficult, challenging workforce issues. So I just want to say thank you to Rachel, because she really does carry a lot on her shoulders and has done a phenomenal amount of work over the last year with her team.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Rachel, there's a question in the chat from Claire about where is neurodiversity within the shadow executive or within this whole package, please?
So sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
My screen's whirring, so I'm concerned that you might not be able to hear me. So in terms of the shadow executive, so we invited applicants from right across the whole breadth of Oxley's, and particularly encouraged diversity in terms of our applications. So we have 2 members of staff within that group who have disabilities, including neurodisabilities as well. So it is something we're really keen to try and make sure that we get the balance right across all of our different bits of the organisation, but particularly within our shadow executive. Does that answer your question, Claire?
It does, thank you, because it's just one of those areas that I find is very, very hidden for service users and just across the board. You know, whenever I go to any boards, I always ask, you know, where's the neurodiversity in this? So thank you.
Right, Ray, did you ask me a question?
Yes, thanks, Andy. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Ray.
Thanks very much for the report. And you know, I really admire everything that you and everyone else at Oxley's is doing. You've made great progress. But please, I've got a big request to you, please. So as you know, I observe the board occasionally, and I observe committees occasionally. And the cover reports for the board and for the committees ask report writers to draw out implications for finance, quality, equality, and service user issues. Time and time again, we let ourselves down by report writers not drawing out for readers and not emphasizing to people seeing those reports what the equality issues are. Some committees, it's 100% no mention of equality. Others do a little bit better. Some report writers use stock phrases that don't mean much. So Rachel, it may seem a trivial matter, but it's a really important presentational matter. Please, will you work with the report writers and the chairs of committees? I spoke to Nina yesterday about this, in order to make sure that people can draw out the implications for equality in each and every report. It's not a difficult thing to do. Report writers are really on top of it. So please, can you promise and commit to do that?
Ray, I'm very happy to commit to doing that, to speak to the, to make sure that we include, when we send out the pack, some guidance about how to do this well. And if anyone's got any questions about how they do that, Karen Edmonds would be very happy to support them. But yes, it's a point you've made before and we need to make quicker progress on it. So thanks for highlighting it again, Ray.
Thank you. Good luck.
Leslie?
Yeah, I just want to be clear on what neurodiversity is. Is that mental health or is it something else?
What I'm talking about is things like autism, ADHD, PDA, things like that. So I think one of the problems is it comes up, you know, it very much is under the umbrella of disabilities, but there's you know, disabilities is a huge area, equality's a huge area, and sometimes, you know, everyone's just sort of stuck in the same bucket, and I just think that's why I'm saying, you know, we need to be sort of mindful that it is a huge area and that everyone is represented.
Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel, there's also, in addition to that, there's also a question about, is the shadow exec a time limited opportunity? Is there rotation?
Thanks. So I'll answer both those questions if that's all right, Andy. So the first one is the shadow exec is established for a year, and we will then be recruiting for new applicants for the following year, because it's a really intensive development opportunity for people and we hope to have a really good pipeline. And I'm pretty sure that we will be seeing people from our shadow executive on the board in not too distant future. I really think we've got some fantastic people in there. In terms of neurodiversity, I think Neil's made a helpful point on the chat, but it's something I think we can be doing a lot more. And I would really like us to be an employer that has a specific offer and is specifically thinks about what we need to do in order to be a really good employer of, and a place that people want to work if they have neurodisability issues. So I think there is more that we can be doing in that space for sure.
Well done, thank you, Rachel. Thanks ever so much. We move on to the next one, which is the 4B, which is the delivering quality management. We've got Yemisi and Vicky.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going to do a really brief introduction. Part one of our strategic approach for quality is the development of our quality management framework, and Vicky's going to give a quick presentation on that. And part two, again, of our strategic focus is looking at patient involvement and inclusion and co-production that we've been talking about for years, and how do we not do it as a tick box exercise, but actually make it meaningful and actually see outcomes from it. So part two, Neil will do a presentation on that. So if I could hand over to Vicky first, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, MSA. Can you hear me okay? Great, thank you. The presentation is going to be put up by Joe, I believe.
It's just loading, Vicky.
Thank you. So I'm going to be presenting today talking about the building block one of our strategy, which is delivering quality management, but really going through a bit of our quality report first. So with the quality report, I'll just give you a little bit of background. Due to the pandemic, the requirements have been changed in this year. So we're for NHS Foundation Trust to produce a quality report as part of the annual report. So now we have to just produce one as part of our statutory requirements for the quality accounts, and we have to do that by the 30th of June. So what this really means is that the report is not required to be audited, and therefore the indicator that you chose in December last year isn't required this year to be audited. Okay, so it's just to inform you about that, so you're not expecting to see the report from that. So go on to the next slide, please. Sorry. Shall I just take control? Okay. So the annual quality report is available on a request, but it will be published on by the 30th of June on our website and on the NHS website. And the following areas are within our report. So we have a statement on quality from the Chief Executive. We have our response to COVID-19, which is an additional thing we added this year because we felt it was important to include. Our quality priorities, including our priorities for 2021-22, statements of assurance and learning from deaths, and then our overview of quality of care for 2020-21. So for the overview for quality for 2021, we have 6 quality objectives over the last year, with a number of metrics that sit under each one. So the report provides the full details of how we have done in each of these different priority areas. There were a number of areas where the targets were not achieved or only partially achieved. For these areas, the report provides the rationale and also the improvement plan for where we're going to measure these in the future and how they've been implemented into our quality priorities for next year. So delivering the quality management framework. So this is previously I presented this at the Council of Governors meeting. I think it was the last one you attended. The quality management framework, which is the first building block of the trust strategy. Over the next few slides, I really want to just go into a little bit more detail about how we've updated this and how it's being implemented across the trust. So quality planning. So with the quality management framework in mind, we have changed the way in which we select and implement the quality priorities. So PQAC has approved this new process and involves replacing the 6 quality objectives that are just on the last page with these new 20 key areas of focus. These sit under the 3 DASI domains: patient safety, clinical effectiveness, and patient experience, as in previous reports. So these really are the 20 key areas of focus really are identified through quality planning, assurance, control and improvement data, and also co-designed with our staff and also with the people we care for. So from the list of the 20 key focus areas, 6 quality priorities are selected that require quality improvement or a main focus on what we're looking at. So the remaining areas of focus will then be monitored through our governance routes and exception reported if things start to slip away. So these are, on the screen, you see the selected quality priorities for 2021-22. So under patient safety, we have reducing restrictive practice, and prevention, early identification and management of physical health deterioration and sepsis. So that includes things like monitoring of our news score and also monitoring of our patient physical health monitoring after rapid tranquilization. Clinical effectiveness, we're looking at effective risk identification and personalised care planning. So that includes the CPA reviews, which we had at previous years, and also how we monitor risk assessments and appropriate personalised care planning. Improving physical health care and mental health care, and for patient experiences, improving patient experience, making sure we meet our patient promise and ensuring we involve family carers and people important to our patients. So under the rest of the quality management framework, we have quality controls. This is about maintaining quality and knowing when it slips away. So as we've been developing this infrastructure around this quality fundamental component, we've been looking at how we develop and monitor the 20 key areas of focus, to making sure that we monitor these and we exception report when things do slip away, if they slip away, but also monitoring the quality priorities and looking at how we can develop dashboards that we can present at the various committees as we go forward. So we're looking at service level dashboards, as well as dashboards for our patient safety meetings, clinical effectiveness, and for PQAC. So also we've been looking at how we develop our meeting governance. For example, the Patient Safety Group has now developed their terms of reference based on the quality management framework, making sure they look at all 4 areas of quality when they're reviewing and getting the assurance in. So it's looking at planning, control, assurance and improvement. And then quality assurance, so independently check the quality. So this is really about how we focus on internally inspecting and reviewing our services to making sure we're getting it right before we get external scrutiny. So the clinical audit programme has been revised this year, and we've now got a centralised process following an audit we had previously last year. And also we've been looking at revising the Improving Lives peer review assurance programme, which is our own internal peer review programme, looking at how we using methodology from CQC to rate our services and to provide improvements in those areas. And then lastly is quality improvements. This is how we deliver the improvement. So we're working on scaling up and spread some of our really good, excellent work that we've had through the Quality and Innovation and Improvement Committee, and linking this with trust strategies and priorities, making sure we look at how we link these in with the ones that have the biggest impact and will have the biggest difference on those areas of quality priorities that we're looking at. Also looking at triage in the right methodology. As a trust, we use the IHI model of improvement for quality improvement projects, but we need to now look at further ones for those that don't suit that type of methodology. So looking at rapid improvement work, also looking at the other types of methodologies we could use, like lean methodologies and things. And then also increasing our service user involvement. We've developed some service user training, but also looking how we can implement service users within our Improving Lives programmes, and also in other aspects of how we measure and monitor quality. And then lastly is development of a system-wide QI. So we're working with the ICSs to look at how we develop more system-wide QI projects to go across the whole system rather than just looking individually at each trust. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Vicky. Really good and tremendous amount of work going on here. Yeah, Marcia, we're going to go on to Neil now. Is that the plan?
Yes, we are. Thank you. There are no further questions for Vicky.
Okay. Thank you. Neil, please.
Thanks very much. So I want to talk about bolstering service user family in public involvement in our services. So the whole field of involvement has been developing over the last decades. I think, colleagues will be aware that it's no longer possible to just survey people and say that you're including them, that actually we have quite good ways of estimating what is proper co-production and what is merely a kind of consultation type of process. At Oxley's, we're aiming for co-production. We've been developing some areas of co-production over the years, and I think we've had some really good successes where we've seen deliverable and measurable impacts on patient care. It's really something where you can see that just the voice of the person receiving the service joined with the person who is delivering the service is really the best fit for understanding how a service should work. How else could it work? A few years ago, the CQC came and they said they recognised those areas of good practice, but they gave us a criticism that those areas were themselves patchy, that they were not joined up, that they were sort of islands, really, where there was huge variation between the way that different teams, different services were approaching co-production. So we've been looking at what other trusts are doing, looking at the kind of assets that we have, and come to the conclusion that what we need is an infrastructure to join up these areas of good practice, rather than just keep focusing on the good practice and somehow hope that that will spread by itself. What we need is much more connectedness between the different sort of areas where we could involve people, engage with them, co-produce with them. So there are a number of facets to this. And in the pack, there's a map of the sort of desired shape of the kind of infrastructure that we'd like. First, we have some really important ways that we engage with people. We have our volunteering, which is a huge operation, about 600 volunteers involving themselves in services, doing amazing work, doing things that can actually free up professionals to do other types of work, improving our skill mix. Really, really valuable contribution, estimated to be a value of around millions for our trust. Then we have another area which Joe Mant has been holding really, really spectacularly well, which is around membership. And we have thousands of members. We would and partner organizations where we can connect with the public, think about how we represent, and of course that's of great importance to governors in the meeting, because it's about the conversations we've been having about how do we connect with our communities and how do we represent them, but how do we involve them as well. A few years ago we had a carers lead. We disestablished that role. Partly that was because the role was very much around trying to look at the number of assessments we were doing for carers and thinking about how we could provide support for them. There's a lot of support that comes from the third sector, but actually we'd like to look again at how we engage with carers, because in our carer strategy, we also look at the role of support networks, because actually there are a number of people who are really, really important in our service user lives who would never identify with being carers. So in our children and young people's services, parents would not necessarily identify as carers, they would identify as parents. But also when you ask service users who is important in your life, who would you like involved in either an emergency or in support, very often it's friends, neighbours, people who would not be identified as carers or next of kin. And actually all the evidence shows that if you involve those routinely in care, then actually the care itself, the treatment goes better, but also any discharge from services is so much less frictionless and works much better for everybody. So we'd like to look at re-establishing the care and support network lead post and to give it a broader remit really around actually moving, involving carers, but moving beyond that to just thinking about how services are set up to involve carers, but also to involve carers themselves in some of the other opportunities. Very interesting piece of work happened earlier in the year where Jacqueline Carr was interviewing many of the sort of carer organisations, and what they were asking for was more opportunities, not just more respite, but more opportunities to come in and shape services, which is of course what we're looking for. So we're looking for, we're going for an infrastructure. We're looking to set up a new meeting where we will look at the work of that infrastructure to kind of get people meeting each other. So people will come in. The flip side of that is to prepare staff and to prepare teams to be able to work with, welcome in and engage with members of the public, with carers, with service users, but for that not to be a clinical contact. Now, I feel quite strongly about this because having been trained as a clinician for many years, I've been trained to treat people I meet as patients. And that's really important in treatment because you're working on very specific problems that you're trained to do. Co-production is not about treating people, it's about working with people in a different form of contact. So we know that we're going to need to support our staff, and this follows on very well from Vicky's presentation just now. And we have our leadership program to help us think about improving staff confidence to work with people co-productively, because it's very, very different from a clinical contact. The interesting thing is that really improves staff morale, that actually staff, although some may feel a little bit nervous about doing that initially, all the evidence shows that once you get in the swing of it, and the co-productive methodology is actually a real morale boost for staff. So we're really keen to get cracking with that. And that's why I've put that little quote there, which is a very nice, the contact hypothesis is a guide for me. Co-production is about learning through a different form of contact. So I would like our involved network, our involved infrastructure to be part of how Oxley's is both a listening organisation but a learning organisation as well. And again, that's through different forms of contact. And lastly, one of the big areas that we've been involving people is as part of our workforce. We know that there's a recruitment crisis across London for professionals. We need to think carefully about how we use our professionals, but equally, our lived experience practitioner and volunteers show us that actually there are values brought by people who have used services or have other skills that can really help us with our kind of psychosocial offer and really complement sort of other forms of treatment. And actually, this is a very interesting area where we can develop workforce. We can look at things like our crisis line. We can look at our other sorts of community services for great out of hospital care, where actually I think we can improve the effectiveness by having a broader diversity of offers in the psychosocial practices that we give. So I wanted to give that as a snapshot and to give some sense of what we're aiming for. Number one stop is to get the infrastructure, because unless we connect up, then we won't release the potential that's in all those areas of good practice. So I'll pause there. And was it Yemisi? Were you going to direct the questions? I don't have that bit on my screen. Or
Neil, thanks very much. We've got Ray and then Leslie, please. Ray, you had a question?
Yes, thank you very much, Neil and Yemisi and Vicky. And Neil, we've come across each other in 2 meetings, and you're a breath of fresh air and an inspiration. And I also have a great deal of time for Jacqueline. I think she's indoctrinated me. So I'm going to ask you a question, but I hope Yemisi and Vicky are listening too, because I would have thought for a trust like Oxley's, with its fine traditions of co-production, that it would be a rule that any service development must involve someone with lived experience. It's not, yes, as a rule. And I just wonder, Yemisi and Vicky, in your quality priorities, I just wonder, under patient experience, whether that might be another quality priority, that not for your individual care, but when the trust is working on major service developments, the quality priority would be to involve someone or some peoples with lived experience in that initiative. And I think that would really help Neil and Jacqueline, help the trust in this important matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. And yeah, great question. And I think you're absolutely right. And that is the direction that we are going in order to ensure that when we have the structure that's built around the involved committee that Neil's been talking about, that it then feeds into the quality management framework, so that it's all joined up from that perspective. So it's a journey that we're on, but one that we want to get right from the start and not make it tokenistic. So yeah, that's in effect what we're trying to do. Leslie, please.
Hi, Neil. It's about your infrastructure and how you're proposing to change that and grow it. The research, I agree that it is disjointed across the boroughs. I think there's been some great work done. ResearchNet have been used, and I know in Bromley it's been very successful, but it didn't seem to be carried across the boroughs. And where the work has been done, maybe in Bexley or Greenwich, it has taken a long time to be utilised or been lost in the system. And I just wonder, how do you intend to sustain or maintain the good practice that gets established so it doesn't get lost as it has in the past?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's something we've lived, isn't it? Is seeing some again, it's that pockets of good practice. That the point of the infrastructure is not just to sort of link us with kind of the community around us. It's also to prepare teams to engage with this much more. So in my experience, I think that the ResearchNet's a very good example that you need someone quite senior involved. So actually I would point to our learning disability ResearchNet groups, which are thriving because they are very, very embedded. And I think you're right, when they are perhaps a little bit on the periphery of a service, then the whole thing doesn't work as well. So that's part of the connectedness, in my mind, of the infrastructure, is to connect it into existing structures, not to be an add-on on the side. Even if it's doing brilliant work, if it's not connected to the national grid, it doesn't really feed through. So I think there's been a lot of learning, some of it painful through ResearchNet, but actually that's the kind of learning that we want, is to make it much more of a routine offer. And I completely echo Yemisi's point about, we are looking now to build in measures to look at where co-production is and isn't happening. I think it's a very long journey to get to that, and some areas are far more fertile for that, and others need more kind of help to get going with it. But these are things that we can begin to make this much more the norm rather than a kind of exception, as perhaps sometimes we felt in some of our projects.
I would agree that it's lengthy because, and this is the one thing that I've found difficult in my time as a governor, that some things within the NHS are lengthy, and I don't understand why they take so much time when they don't seem to be difficult things to implement. If I use Bromley ResearchNet, they done a DVD to use on the ward for patients who came on the ward to watch what certain members of staff, what their role was and how it would affect them, and took them through what would happen to them in their admission. And it was received and awards were given, and it was great. And I remember seeing it as a governor. It was presented at a governor body meeting, and it was wonderful work. That didn't get carried out across the board, and then that work was kind of lost. It wasn't maintained. And Bexley done a similar DVD, and it got lost, and they're talking about going through it again. And I really think it's important that when you do something that's successful, that because there is a change of staff, that seems to be where the main issue has been, where people have left and it hasn't been built in that you use that or you update it or you progress it, it gets lost. And I think that's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and it's sad. And I really think somebody needs to take that on board and say, no, it can be quicker. We've done it before, so it shouldn't be this lengthy this time around. We need to take what was learned there and move that at a quicker speed so that people are benefiting far quicker. That's my soapbox tirade for today.
Well, I don't have a single argument against it. So.
A lot of people would agree with you there, Leslie. I think the restructuring will help in that we'll have it focused on those service lines rather than spread across the boroughs. But I think there's a big round of applause for your thoughts there, Leslie. Thanks ever so much. John Crowley, please.
Thanks, Andy. I think my observations to add to what Neil and Vicky said were, as a member of Serious Incident Panel over the last year or two, an issue that comes through is about practitioners being aware of the think family philosophy. you know what I mean, in all our interactions with services. So to me, it was a little bit wider than the QI comments, which I just observed on the screen. And I guess to urge colleagues to promote the Think Family philosophy when you're engaging both with the co-production as well as the quality improvement project, really.
Well said, thank you. Sue Salter, please.
Is that me, Andy? Sorry, I had my hand up. Sue.
Yes, please, Sue. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's really following on from all the comments, and I have put a message up on the board. I think the whole concept to me about the building blocks is about supporting the staff, the carers, because if the staff feel they're supported for what they're doing, the care they give can only be better. And I think that's part of where I come from on that. I think the whole part of what you're saying in terms of a building block across the whole package is about supporting the staff and making sure they feel valued, because if we value the staff, they will value the people they're caring for, and it's moving that whole package together and making sure from Oxley's, which do it very well, can only go for improvement. I think it's always moving forwards and really ticking the boxes. Never be so sure you've done everything right, always look for improvement and move it forward. Thank you.
Well said, Sue. Thanks ever so much. Steve Pleasance, please.
Yeah, I mean, I am a member of Bromley Research Net as well as being a governor. So I've worked with Neil for quite a number of years now. And listen, Leslie, I applaud exactly what you said there. You know, it does take a long time. It can be very frustrating. We have tried to do several projects, which unfortunately we've come to a grinding halt over the years. But I think with what Neil and the rest of the team are trying to do now is great, because I think the staff, quite rightly, sometimes they've got so much on their plate, they think, oh, not another project we've got to get involved in. Oh dear, you know, EBCD, it sounds wonderful. And then sometimes they can feel slightly attacked. And that's not the way we're doing this. We're working together. This is what co-production is all about. So, you know, I'm looking for, I think this is really good stuff, and looking forward to the future.
Thanks, Steve. Rebecca.
Thank you, Andy. I was thinking about the staff development opportunity, because it is a different way of working. And as Neil was saying, and Neil was a very good presentation, and it's really helpful to sort of feel, how do you feel in your mind that you're going to work with the staff to have that slightly a different approach, the less clinical approach, but the actual the involvement of our patients and public.
So we've looked at what other trusts have done, and also where we've had success. And so Rachel Townsend is doing some really, really interesting work with our leadership offer. And if we can think of leadership as not just sort of leading the people you manage, leading yourself and working with your manager, but also engaging with the public, you know, learning from what people are telling you, none of whom are considered patients, but they are just as citizens. This is, I think, a really good way of bringing that kind of skill and building confidence. And generally, it's been our experience and colleagues in other trusts as well, that once people have a few goes at it, that it becomes quite addictive, because actually you start to see your own problems being solved through co-production. So exactly as Steve was saying, you know, at first you think, oh, it's more work, and then you start to realize, oh my goodness, it's beginning to solve things. And it's interesting. So it's a matter of confidence. So a matter of sort of support and practical learning, I think, is the best way to kind of do this.
Well done, Neil. Yeah. Thank you. So, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you for that, Neil, because that is all about sort of leaders and followers and how our roles sometimes reverse. Yeah. And actually, I can see how by working this way, it would enable some of the problems that come later on to be unpicked at the beginning, which is going to be much better for our patient and family experiences. Thank you.
Well said, Rebecca. Thank you. If we can move on now to the next one. That's is this you now, Azra?
It is.
I'm just going to share a screen. So this is going to be the same presentation that's within the pack, but I'm not intending to go through each element. And sorry, because I'm going to be now presenting that, I'm not going to be able to see hands. So it'd be incredibly helpful, Andy, if you could come in if there's any questions along the way. So I'm going to skip over the first couple of slides and concentrate on this one. So the slide pack is effectively covering off what the financial position is going to be for 21-22, and they've split the financial allocations that they've given out into half one, which is H1, month 1 to 6, and half 2. And at the moment, they've only issued out the guidance for half 1. And they based that guidance on taking what we spent in Q3 last year, i.e. the month 9 to month 12 spend pattern for both what we spent and the income that we received. So the first column was what we were originally sent out by the national team of the expectation of the Oxley's performance. The second column is then the system revised figure. So all of the funding that was supporting this was actually allocated to the South East London ICS for distribution across all of the various different organisations. And there was quite a lot of changes that came through in that. And that's principally driven by the fact that we had non-recurrent items appearing in Q3 of last year. So if I just give you a couple of examples without going through the entire reconciliation, that included things like we took on NHS funded complex care, but we only took that on from November. So if you doubled that by 2, we'd only have 4 months worth of expenditure and income in that position, and therefore we needed to do an adjustment for that on both sides. Also, we sold an asset in the Q3 period for circa £1 million. That was doubled up in this figure when they gave us our H3 in terms of income, and we also had to adjust for those. There was a series of adjustments that we were effectively going through and effectively establishing what we felt was the correct expenditure position for Oxley's, and then we needed to go through a negotiation process with the ICS to secure the level of funding to deliver a break-even position. And every one of the ICS NHS organisations was going through that same process, including the CCG, where they were resting on what they felt their expenditure profile would be for H1 of 21-22, and then negotiating what they would need on income, and then bridging the difference between those two with whatever the SIP requirement is. And that's what you're beginning to see in the orange box that we've got here. So there was a couple of areas that we were going through in terms of what the underlying position is under H1. Firstly, for the provider collaboratives, where Oxley's is the adult secure provider for South London, and for the NHS complex care, there's £41 million in that £201.4 million figure that just accounts for those two. Both of those then are also reflected in the expenditure because we're expecting to fully spend it. We received a significant amount of investment into mental health this year, to the tune of £12 million, and that was made up of mental health investment monies, service development fund monies, and service review monies. All of those are recurrent and we would be expecting to spend them. We had to do a full year mental health plan, so that 12 million is for the full year. 6 million of it would flow through in half one, roughly about £1 million a year. And I have to, £1 million a month, sorry. That £1 million we only really had confirmed towards the end of April. And clearly we would need to recruit staff to be able to cover and actually deliver some of the outcomes that we would be expecting within the period, and also to make sure that we were spending the money. And we knew that we were going to struggle to recruit that. So what we have said is if people can secure temporary staffing, such as agency, bank or fixed term contracts, they should do that as soon as possible to try and ensure that this investment gets spent as quickly as possible. But we also recognised that may be difficult given some of our workforce issues. The area that we didn't manage to secure additional funding for, and that was true for every organisation, was on recovering some of the waiting list issues that we had in mental health. So we are also using whatever we're getting as an underspend in that period to help to bolster some of the resources that we need in order to address some of the accumulated waiting times that we've got. The two elements of system top-up, so this was part of the negotiation that we were doing with South East London ICS, is a COVID top-up of 6.1 and a system top-up of 2.6, so adding to £8.7 million. That 8.7 million was effectively the differential that we had between income and expenditure after we had accounted for what was going to have to be our SIP delivery, which was the 5.1 million. That's roughly about 2.6% SIP delivery for Oxley's, most of which is effectively going to be delivered non-recurrently, quite a lot through those additional monies that we're going to be getting for the mental health investment. The area that's not on this sheet is the fact that we additionally had a much smaller increase in investment for our community physical health. We're still finalising the figures for that with the CCG because all of these are backed into contracts, and that is looking in the region of £2 million with a possible £1 million coming from other sources. But we're waiting for final sign-off from the CCG before we actually apply that through. I don't know whether or not there's been any questions being raised through that, Andy. Okay, in which case I shall carry on. I think I probably covered most of the elements on this sheet. There's a bit of a typo at the bottom, apologies. That still refers to 12.1 million of new monies. The reason that we've got a difference is the CCG, once they did their final reconciliation back to contract, identified about 100,000 that they actually had a contract with the voluntary care sector, and that was a last minute adjustment and it's just not made it onto this particular slide. Linking then that H1 position into the broader Oxley strategy, we've got two elements. The first one is what's going to happen for half two, months 7 to 12 of this financial year. And there will be a renegotiation. So at the moment, Julian Kelly, the CFO for NHS-IE, needs to go into a separate negotiation with Treasury for the second half of this financial year. And he's indicated that the planning guidance that all of the organisations will receive for that is likely to be September, ready for an October start. And I have to say that has been a bit of a feature of all of the financial planning we have seen during the COVID period, because in each stage there's had to be a negotiation with Treasury, and that has tended to be right up to the wire of the period that we're about to actually enter operationally. So we will wait to see what that brings. Matthew at the beginning highlighted out the fact that we were moving into a new regime with the ICS, and within that overarching strategy that we've got for the ICS will be the financial strategy. So we're going to be preparing that as a group of DOFs and CFOs for South East London concurrently with the South East London ICS strategy. And we've already decided that we will establish our first formally constituted group for month 3. So we'll have our first meeting in July, which will be minuted and will be a formal subcommittee of the shadow South East London ICS position. But we've still got to work through, I would say, quite a bit of detail about exactly how that will work. We will then utilise what we have within that South East London financial strategy to link through with the Trust's big 3 priorities and the other 7 building blocks, with a view to having a financial plan that actually underpins the Oxley's strategy for 21 to 24 with a set of financial assumptions. They do have to wait, I have to say, for a bit more articulation and meat on the bones of exactly what the next steps will look like over that period of time. So I'll be liaising with all of the other leads for those areas, including the 7 building blocks, to be able to have costed proposals that we would be able to present. The outcome of where the SIPs are currently sitting in recurrent bases is we entered the pandemic with £13.5 million of recurrent CIP delivery that we needed to basically secure to make ourselves sustainable in the longer term. We funded 1.2 million internally within the trust, which has increased that gap to 14.7 million as recurrent CIPs. And we will need to try and address that over that period of time. So I'm not expecting for that to be addressed on a recurrent basis this year, or even fully, I think, next year. And I think there is a recognition that in each one of the following years, there was likely to be a little bit of an increase in regards to the unfunded cost pressures that we would put through, probably of the same tune. I'd want to try and limit that to about £1.2 million. So quite a lot, I would say, of work to be done on this front, in association with colleagues and in partnership with the ICS, because the financial regime is going to shift quite significantly over that period of time. I'm going to leave it there, Andy, and then take any questions.
You got to one from Kate Higgs, please.
Thank you, Zara. We haven't met, but I'm Partnership Governor. I'm Chief Exec at Greenwich and Bexley Community Hospice. I was interested to hear about the way that the various finance teams from the NHS trusts are getting together to inform the ICS financial strategy, but just wondering what the plan is to involve other commissioned organisations in that development, because clearly we also have skin in the game with that. And I mean, I recognise the challenges you're dealing with and the scale in terms of what you're dealing with, but we haven't even got our allocation at all yet, for the first 6 months, let alone the rest of the year. So it would be good to think about how hospices and the like could be involved in this.
Can I just pick up then, is your funding principally coming via the CCG?
So our statutory funding comes via the CCG, yes.
So that should have formed part and parcel of the CCG plans, because, as I said, certainly for both mental health and for physical health, quite a lot of it was backed with our contractual arrangements. And what I don't have, unfortunately, is the definitive answer of whereabouts they have got to with the negotiations with everybody that is within their financial envelope. I would hope they would have already factored that in, because they have landed on the total quantum that they would have available to spend over that period of time. So if they haven't already come out, I would expect them to come out. At the moment, we haven't evolved detail.
Yeah, that's not what I'm asking. I'm not, you know, we'll get what allocation we get. What I'm interested in is the piece which is about influencing the future ICS development, and how our finance leads for our respective organisations of the other commissioned groups can be involved in those discussions, as opposed to be passive in them and being told what we're going to get, because we can work in partnership, as Ian, you know, rightly alluded to at the beginning, and have been doing throughout this whole development.
So I think that's going to tend to be in partnership with the groups that you've been working with. So at the moment, I haven't got the full element of detail. And coming back to what Matthew was saying at the beginning in regards to the development of the overarching partnership board and some of the views that have taken on there, that is going to be restricted to some degree with the number of people that are going to be round the table. And I would imagine that the financial support network will be reflective of some of those organisations. So I haven't got the definitive answer for you at the moment, Kate, I apologise, because I think that's still in development.
Thanks.
No, thank you very much indeed, Ezra. A huge amount of work you and your team have got through recently, so thank you very much indeed. Now, if we're going to take a break now, what is it? if we say at 20 past, can we come back at 20 past 4, 16:20, please, and we will resume. Okay, thank you. report. Who's going to lead? Amlan, Jane?
I'll start, and then I'll invite Lorraine and Amlan to join us. I'm just going to share my screen if I may. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Yep. So this is an incident that was chaired by Dr. Michael Whitney, who was our Director of Therapies who retired recently. So we're presenting on his behalf. Mr. A was a 43-year-old male, fairly well known to our services within Oxleys. He had a diagnosis of alcohol dependency, emotionally unstable personality disorder, and a dependent personality disorder. And I do apologise. He'd been in our services. He'd had 11 admissions over the last 5 years. And at the time of his death, he'd been admitted as an informal patient to Bettsward at Green Parks House. He was also receiving support from the Bromley Drug and Alcohol Services, and he was starting to engage well with them regarding his use of alcohol. Unfortunately, he was homeless, but he was getting very good support from his ADAPT care coordinator in securing supported accommodation. So he was coming up to the point where he would have been discharged. Sadly, on the 7th of September, Mr. A was using his leave away from Bettsward, and he didn't return to the ward on time. And when staff contacted his friend to find out where he was, it was identified that he'd deceased. He'd fallen from a bridge. So the panel identified a few key factors. First of all was around the risk assessment and the reliance on a subjective risk assessment as opposed to a more objective risk assessment. And they considered whether the pending move into supported accommodation could have been considered as a risk during the discharge planning phase, given that he was really benefiting from the containment and the support and the company that the ward had provided. There was also a lack of confidence or understanding about what could be implemented in order to manage informal patients and their risks, particularly in relation to them having time off of the ward. And finally, his absence was not escalated in the same way afforded to those who were deemed to be medium or high, or that of a detained patient when it was established that he hadn't returned to the ward. So 3 recommendations were made, and I'll invite Lorraine in a moment just to update on how far we've got with these. But it was recommended that there was a review of the policy for absent without leave, that's AWOL as some people call it, to ensure that informal patients are afforded the same duty as care as formal patients. And I can confirm that happened at the Mental Health Legislation Oversight Group, and no required changes were made to the policy. The second is around daily risk assessments of informal inpatients being developed for inpatient services. And Lorraine will update on the work that the Acute Care Forum have been doing. And finally, the ward team were to develop a process to ensure that the patients are regularly screened for drugs and breathalyzed for use in line with the trust policy. Lorraine, may I hand over to you to update on the action plan now?
Thanks, Jane. So people have seen the action plan in the papers, and as Jane said, the first action related to a review of the policy, which was completed, was looked at in both the MH log meeting on the Acute Care Forum, and both of those groups were satisfied that the process was equally as robust for informal patients, and so no changes were made to that policy on the back of that review. The second action related to a daily risk assessment of informal patients to be developed. So this is where obviously you'll know that informal patients are free to leave the ward, but what we ask of them is that when they're leaving the ward, they approach a member of staff and there's a basic risk assessment done, that there's been no significant changes in risk, and then they're signed out. We took that to the Acute Care Forum, which was the action. I think it created some helpful discussion. All of our inpatient units confirmed that they have a process in place. But what we were trying to achieve was a standardised process for all 3 units. So they agreed, modern matrons agreed to meet, to share their individual processes and to come up with a single template. That then went back to Acute Care Forum in April for discussion, and they've agreed to trial that single template and bring back their findings to the June Acute Care Forum. So there's been quite a lot of work, but we haven't yet signed off a single template, but all of the units are using a robust process. And one of the things that our colleagues in our inpatient units felt that we could do as an addition to this was try and make a process whereby that daily risk assessment is an electronic risk assessment, so that they're not having to upload scanned copies of paper forms to Rio, which I think was a very good suggestion and one that we would certainly support. So that piece of work is happening as part of this action now. And the final action was for our ward to develop a process that ensured patients were regularly screened for drugs and breathalyzed for alcohol in use with the trust policy. So the team on Vets Ward have met and discussed the trust policy and checked their process against it. We have met with them to discuss that. I think there was perhaps some variation based on individuals' understanding as opposed to based on the actual process that they had set out. But to make that easier, they have developed one-side process maps that are now on display in the nursing office to remind individual staff members of that process. So that action is also completed. So 2 of the 3 are completed, and I think the second action has had some good work, and I think for good reason needs a little bit longer to make sure that we've got something really robust in place.
Thanks very much, Lorraine and Jane. Amlan, did you have any observations?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that obviously this is, you know, a hugely tragic case, and it's always difficult to look back and pick various bits and pieces apart in terms of action plans and risk assessments. Just a couple of thoughts, I guess, on the risk assessment part, which both Jane and Lorraine have mentioned, which is, you know, as you would expect, so critical to these kinds of cases. I think there's a really key differentiation that we've spoken about in terms of the risk that is sometimes assumed if a patient is informal as opposed to detained. And the assumption sometimes made by teams is that if a patient is informal, then their level of risk is necessarily less than somebody that has been detained. And of course, that isn't always the case. And that's why I think the risk assessment process is so key to this. The second point around the risk assessment, I think, is about the purpose of the admission. And as Jane alluded to in the presentation, this was a gentleman that was very well known to services. He'd been in patients for a while, and, you know, a number of times before. And I think there was a sense that actually there was this awful phrase, it's almost as though it was a social admission, you know, and actually the point of the admission was to find appropriate housing for him. And actually, once that housing had been found, then his risks would reduce. And that goes back to the point of risk assessment, that in many ways, there was a sense that actually this gentleman was actually destabilised by the idea of going out into the community, and that's why he sought inpatient services. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be taken from this case, and I think the recommendations and the implementation of it will really be very key, and I agree totally with the recommendations coming out of it.
Thanks, Alan. Yvonne, you were on this.
Thank you. Yes, I was the governor on this one. I echo everything Amlan just said, but having just listened to what you said, as a layperson, I'm not exactly sure what's going to change. And what is proposed to change might have helped in this case prevent the tragedy that occurred. So can somebody translate that for a layperson to say how the action we are undertaking might have made a difference and prevented this tragedy?
I think it's very difficult to say that we would ever have been able to predict or prevent any incident like this, and that's definitely not what the investigation process is looking for. What we are looking for is learning, and I think from what I've heard from the panel, that the learning around this was around the weight put on the risk assessment and the objectivity around informal patients. And I think from the discussions at the Acute Care Forum, there is real recognition that people want to make sure that these risk assessments are absolutely as robust in terms of informal patients as those that are detained under the Mental Health Act, and that the same risk assessments are afforded to them all. And likewise with the making sure that people are appropriately tested for drugs and alcohol on admission and on return from leave in line with the policy in all wards. So I think it's more about learning rather than being able to say we would have been able to predict or prevent it, because I really don't think we would ever do that. And
I used perhaps the wrong word. I think mitigate.
Don't worry.
Prevent, I agree that in these circumstances, this could always have happened, but the question is more around how, if we implement all the actions proposed, do we reduce the risk of this happening again? That's probably a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I see. I think it's really around if we can get the risk assessments and the culture of being very proactive and using that professional curiosity and picking up on the subtle cues and using them objectively and having a much broader much more prompter picking up of any signs and symptoms as part of the MDT discussions, then that will go a long way to help support people to manage any risks. A lot of it is very much down to that sort of professional curiosity that you can pick up on those subtle cues when people are changing. Lorraine, I don't know whether you want to add anything further from discussions with the team.
I think you've probably captured it all, Jane. I mean, I think there is definitely something about how staff use risk assessments dynamically, and that they don't assume that things haven't changed from one day to the next, and that they're looking for those opportunities to engage patients in kind of meaningful discussions about how they're feeling before they leave the ward. So I'm sure that that learning actually, and we've talked a lot about it with some of our other wards, and it's something that they worry about actually as a staff team, and so we've got I think a duty to kind of support them to think about how they do that on a busy ward. So I don't think it's completely straightforward, but I think that there is potential for us to make real difference.
Thanks, Lorraine. Leslie, please.
Yeah, I think actually informal patients can sometimes be more at risk because people aren't looking for that same risk. Speaking from personal experience, someone who was capable of hiding so much that was going on inside and what I was experiencing, and not always sharing because I wasn't feeling completely trusting or that I would be understood. I think a lot of the time I was at risk. And I think suicidal thoughts, when people are experiencing those things, or fear of not coping with the responsibility that they're about to be given, can push them into an even more dangerous situation within themselves. And I think part of your care plan should be helping those people implement a plan of action for when they get the suicidal thoughts that they're not sharing with anybody, what they can do and how not to proceed with them. I really think that having a plan written down, step-by-step process, what you do, is going to help people in that situation. And as far as putting people in housing that are not ready for it, there's a lot of people who are homeless because they can't cope with the thought of keeping a house and the responsibility and managing a budget. And I don't think that comes out in a risk assessment either. I think those practical things really need to be addressed and dealt with, because then you are helping them cope. And it's okay. People have asked me, what do you do to cope? Oh, well, I can phone a friend, I can go for coffee with a friend and all that. And that's all very good when your mind's working well. But when your mind's not working well, you can't implement those things. And that's part of what the risk assessment and the care plan needs to address and implement. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Leslie. Rebecca, please.
Thank you, Andy. It's always hard, isn't it, to hear about these tragic cases whereby a person and their family, they've all been affected very deeply. I know one of the recommendations, which was a good suggestion by staff for the daily risk assessment, not to be scanned in, but actually to be put electronically straight onto Rio. I was just wondering, do all staff, including agency staff and temporary staff, do they all have access to the Rio system?
Yeah, they all have access to Rio, and it was looking like we could probably get this form on the little devices that staff have now got to record EOBs, which would be really good, and they're readily available to all staff. They're using them routinely throughout the day to record observations. So yeah, hopefully a really positive way forward on that. Okay, thank you, Lorraine.
Amlan, I don't know if you saw that question there from Suzanne. You're not under any obligation to answer that, but
I was so tempted to reply that I'd rather not in the chat, but that's fine. I feel rather set up. But without wishing to kind of bore everyone with the details, I guess the debate has been ongoing very intensely for a long time between different extremes of risk assessment. On the one end, something that's purely statistically based and actuarial, where you literally just tot up risk factors and it churns out a number, to the other extreme, which I guess is just professionals saying that they use their own judgment. And I think the consensus has been that a kind of structured professional judgment approach is probably the best. But the research findings and some of the NICE guidance reflects particularly on the risk to self, actually it being incredibly difficult, even when using structured professional judgment, to come to very helpful predictive solutions. And I think that is partly, to echo what's just been said, some of the very individualized risk factors and protective factors that will not come out necessarily in pro formas and templates. I mean, if we're to look at this particular example, you know, most actuarial risk assessments would tell you that stable housing was a protective factor. But actually for this individual, you might look back and think, actually, it's exactly that he might be having trouble coping with. So I think, you know, there's so much nuance in this, and there is no substitute for genuinely understanding the individual in front of you in as much depth as possible. And there isn't a template necessarily that is ever going to adequately replace that individualized knowledge of the individual.
Thank you very much, Amlan. It's extremely helpful. Lorraine, I was just thinking that, hey, this was a terrible tragedy, but as a voluntary patient, what options are there for staff? Just walk out when you want to.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this so difficult for staff, because they do need to be, you know, looking and talking and engaging with patients regularly to pick up those kind of signs that would enable them to react quickly enough to prevent somebody who is entitled to walking out of the door. So it's, you know, I think our ward staff have got really busy jobs, and our kind of role is to support them to really find time to engage in conversation with our patients, be observing and know what to observe for. But I think, as Amlan said, even then, actually, it can be quite difficult for them to make an assessment that would predict something might happen if a person left the ward. So it's a really difficult job, I think, for our staff.
Absolutely, thank you. Was
Andy,
sorry.
No, sorry, just final comment really about this issue of informal versus detained. I think for most trusts and certainly most social workers, it would be considered bad practice to detain somebody under the Mental Health Act if they were willing to come in for treatment voluntarily. But of course, the flip side to that is that it's also bad practice to say, yes, you can be admitted informally, but if you try and leave, we'll then detain you at that point under a Section 5.2 or whatever it is. So staff in that situation are in a very tricky position. And one of the things that is hugely helpful to staff is to understand risk. And if genuinely the assessment is such that a voluntary patient's risks are such that you really wouldn't want them to just, leave the ward at a whim and come back whenever they like, then actually the use of the Mental Health Act can be very protective in those situations. But I think shortly after somebody's admitted voluntarily, it seems like a very backward step to then use the Mental Health Act. And so it's a very complicated set of dynamics. And just in response to Leslie's question about the peer involvement, I think the real difficulty with that, I think the peer involvement is more helpful in terms of the experience, as I think you very well articulated just now, of what are the key ingredients that should be asked about. But we just got to balance the individual patient confidentiality with that for individual cases. So I totally agree with you that actually getting some collated experience of what it's like to be on the other side of that risk assessment is vital and can be hugely informative. But we probably can't stray that into individual decisions because of confidentiality.
Thanks very much, Amlin. And thanks to everyone who was on this. Thank you, Yvonne, and everyone else that's involved in this. And I think very good questions about how we're going to make sure that we do learn lessons from this. And this applies to all of our serious incidents, to make sure that we do, whilst recognising the huge challenge for our frontline staff. Is there anything else from anybody else on that one? If not, we'll move on to the next item, which is Richard on the NED nomination committee.
Thanks very much, Andy. As colleagues are aware, one of our key responsibilities as governors is to appoint, reappoint, and indeed on an ongoing basis monitor the performance of our non-executive directors. We've been doing that, obviously, as the last year or so has gone on in different ways, but we've now come to a point at which we have a spate of formal decisions that we are going to have to be making over the next few months. You have the paper in front of you, which sets out that we have Andy coming to the end of his second 3-year term as our chairman and is eligible for reappointment. Steve Billworth coming to the end of his second 2-year term as a non-executive director, and again he can be reappointed. I'm just going down through my list. Steve James, no, I'll come back to Steve in a second. Nina, who is coming to the end of her first 3-year term and is eligible for reappointment, and Steve James, who is coming to the end of his third 3-year term and is not eligible for reappointment. So we have several tasks to do over the next few months. The nominations committee met at the end of last month. I've got a list of those who are on the nominations committee, and as you see, majority of the members of the committee are governors. Everyone was present bar Steve James at that meeting, and we were supported by Sally and also Rachel Claire Evans to give us professional advice. And we've come up with a proposal to put to you this afternoon about the process that we want to do. We're recommending that over the next couple of months, some work is done to get all of our thoughts on how we feel Andy, Steve and Nina have been performing in their roles, to advise the nominations committee on what recommendations they should bring forward to a future Council of Governors on whether those appointments should be continued for a further term. And in the case of Steve, who will have to leave us, to start a process for recruiting a replacement for Steve to join the board at the end of this year. So I hope people have had a chance to read the paper, and colleagues, you will be happy to agree the proposal that Nominations Committee is putting forward to you is adopted, and I know we will have the full support of Sally and Rachel and others within the executive of making sure all the processes of gathering your thoughts are put together. So that's all from me at this stage, really just looking for agreement from colleagues that this process is one that they feel comfortable and happy with.
I don't think you see the hands, Richard. I think you've got Ray and Michael I can see so far.
Okay, yeah. So take them. Ray?
Hi there. Thank you, Richard. Everything seems to be in order and appropriate. The only thing I would query is the use of a specialist firm for the recruitment to the post that Steve James will be leaving. I mean, I've seen a number of recruitments across FTs and other trusts where they haven't used a specialist recruitment firm. So I just wonder why we'd be doing that and how much that would cost us if we did it. Thank you.
We have over the years, during my time here, attempted this in various different ways. We have gone to the creme de la creme of the recruitment consultancies, you know, the big national ones with offices in the city, who have performed in different ways and cost us a lot of money. We have tried to manage the process entirely in-house and have found, although we haven't had to pay out checks to external bodies, it's created an awful lot of work internally for our staff. When we did our last set of recruitment, which was a couple of years ago, when Suzanne and Amlan were recruited, I have to say the firm we used, and I can't remember their name off the phone, were a relatively modest specialist one focusing in the health sector, who gave us a good deal, came up with a number of pretty strong candidates. And I think the view of the Nominations Committee that on balance, the relatively modest fees that a company of that sort wanted were more than justified given the burden that it took off our own internal processes at a time when we were, or we are, under considerable pressure. So I think that was the conclusion we came to. And I forget whether it was Sally or Rachel Clare who were going away to try and identify some firms and get some numbers for us before a final decision was made.
Could you give us a ballpark cost, Richard, based on 3 years ago?
I'm open to correction on this from somebody who was involved in the process, but I think we ended up it costing us about 10,000.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Right, Rachel, you want to come in? Because I know you've got to go quite soon, haven't you?
Yeah.
I have. Thanks, Andy. Sorry, I've just got to pop back to the hospital. But the just to mention, Ray, that I think the thing that we're most hoping to get out of using recruitment consultants is helping us to get a really diverse group of people from local communities, and to try and winkle people out who might not otherwise kind of volunteer to do this sort of thing. So our hope is not just the fact of being able to run the process, which perhaps isn't the most burdensome thing. It's about actually reaching those candidates that we might not otherwise be able to reach simply with adverts. So that was the feeling as well, I think, of the committee. But the sorts of, obviously there are some commercial confidentiality issues in terms of contracts, specific details about contracts, but the number that Richard mentioned seems about the right ballpark to me, but we're going through a procurement process at the moment.
Thanks, Rachel. You go whenever you've got to go, Rachel, please.
Okay, thank you.
Yvonne, did you want to come in?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'd say I just to kind of support Richard's comments there. It is it's immensely time consuming for a trust or any organisation to try to do this kind of recruitment itself. So although that's that kind of number sounds high, if you work it out on a resource basis, it's it is pretty cost effective, to be honest. in terms of what's involved. I just had a question, obviously not knowing the conversations and the details behind it, but the recruitment timeline itself looks fairly long to me. Doing this kind of work myself. No, you can again, not knowing the reasons why, but you could shorten that down maybe quite considerably and give yourself some insurance at the back end to either, in case you didn't find the right person first time round, or at least give this individual a handover period or a shadowing period with Steve and the board going forwards before the formal appointment dates. So just wondering the reasoning behind the length of the process.
Thanks, Michael. Sally.
Thank you. The touch points really for the length of the process are the Council of Governor meetings, because the actual formal appointment is by the Council of Governors and it can't be delegated to another committee. And we felt that trying to do it for the September meeting would potentially hit holiday times where we're all going for a staycation, but that may shorten the field, and therefore it was better to go for a longer one, with the idea that we'll come back to the December meeting where the Council of Governors can approve the recommendation.
Have I got that? Yvonne, did you want to come in?
Yeah, no, my question was slightly different. It was about the appraisals. I'm just looking down the questions and I didn't see anything about championing and initiating innovation and improvement. And I just wondered if that's a question that should be added.
I mean, on this, I mean, to be frank, a lot of these things are handed down to us from those who think they know what they're doing. And bearing in mind the questions are about me, I find some of them quite puzzling, actually. But there we are. I mean, if a subcommittee wanted to go away and come up with something completely different, I mean, feel free. Sally, I was just trying to think. These are based on guidance of what a NED and a chair role should cover, but balancing length, I guess, and being able to get a lot of people to do a survey that's fairly quick to do with being comprehensive. So the nominations, the NED nominations committee has looked at these and agreed them, but this is the opportunity to tweak those if we want to. So we can add in a question on innovation if that's what the Council of Governors would like to do.
Yeah, I just think it's a key role in moving the organisation forward.
Well, if that's what the broad Council of Governors would like to do, then we can add that in. And we are trying to agree the questions so that we can get the appraisal surveys underway to obviously feed into the process so that we can bring a decision back to September. So I'm very happy to draft a question around innovation, circulate around the Council of Governors, if that's what people would like.
I think that would be helpful, Sally. Just let colleagues know we did have some discussion, and I have to admit some of the questions that had originally come from the centre were somewhat obscure, and we did do a little bit of work in trying to make them more relevant to what we want to do here in Oxleas. There were some very technical terms in some of them I seem to remember originally, which I think may be familiar to those who sort of inhabit the inner sanctums of Skipton House and the Department of Health and Social Care, but not in general use.
Stephen, you coming to the rescue?
Is that me or Steve Jones?
Steve, you Steve.
The only thing I would say about and I totally appreciate where Yvonne's coming from, because it's a perfectly fair point to make. I think that may be difficult in a survey insofar as for a lot of the governors, they might not necessarily know what innovations an individual NED has produced. So I just think maybe rather than doing it through a survey, it may be a good idea for the NEDs to report to the nominations committee as to what they feel they've done and what changes they've made, and then the nominations committee would be fully aware of that. I just think it may be difficult for governors to comment on that particular aspect.
Just to clarify, the questions of both the exec the board members and the governors.
Right. Okay. I mean, so I suppose any useful suggestions we welcome, Sally. If people want to send it through to you on that. Is there anyone else wants to comment on this one? Richard, no, this is yours.
Yeah, Andy, the only thing I would say, if people have got comments, if they could do them fairly quickly, because I know we do want to get the process moving as rapidly as we can. I don't want to sort of spoil it by rushing, but equally we don't want to spend too much time in getting it moving. Because certainly for the reappointments, the intention is for the nominations committee to meet again in well, less than 2 months from now, I think, if memory serves me right, from the dates to get, so that can all be sort of finalised in terms of bringing formal recommendations to Council of Governors at the September meeting.
Leslie.
Leslie, and I can see, I think it's got a hand up after that.
Yeah, I'm looking at the survey questions, and one of them is, do you agree with the following statement? And it's about challenges performance where necessary. And I don't think we as governors actually get to see that process, because I think because of professionalism, if they're going to challenge anything, they'll do it in a board meeting where we're not present. So I don't really think that is a question that we can answer. I do think they take part in discussions where challenges have been put forward, but I don't think we actually get to see that they challenge performance. Other governors may disagree with that, but that's how I see it.
Sally.
Well, just to confirm that governors do come to board meetings and the part 2 of board meetings, so, and the subcommittees, so there is an opportunity for governors to see that. I think the term challenge is not kind of competitive, it's raising queries about performance and asking for assurance about performance. So I think, you know, personally, in the broadest terms of challenge, I think that is portrayed within both the board and the subcommittee meetings, but obviously that's for governors to decide as well.
We did, Sally, didn't we, put another box in there saying not able to comment, because I did feel that some of those questions, some governors just won't know.
Yeah, and that's available on the actual survey, and there's also will be general comment boxes so that people can write other thoughts or other things they'd like to explore as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Claire, please.
It was just in response to you, Leslie, just to say that I've been in the directors' meetings and I've seen and heard, you know, them challenge. So it certainly does happen.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm just saying that we looked at the word differently, and that's one of the things, isn't it? Words mean different things to different people. So thanks for clarifying that, Sally. It puts a different slant on it. Thank you.
Sally, sorry, Richard. I mean, Sally, can you see any others there?
Ray's got his hand up, or is that for another?
Yeah, no, it's following on from previous points and from what Leslie just said, Andy and Richard and Sally, because I have observed Ned's challenging, even though they're the chair of the meeting, challenging the executive team, and also I've seen them put forward suggestions of how things might be done differently, which for my money counts as innovation. So coming back to that previous point, you could massage in that, because challenging performance and suggesting new ways of doing things, I think that's what our non-execs do quite often, and I've seen them do it. So that's my suggestion, Richard.
Well, I think we can do some work around that point, which seems to be the main one that that colleagues have come up fairly quickly, so that we can get that survey out to you all and give people maybe a couple of weeks to think about what they're going to do in terms of the responses. And as Sally made the point, there is right at the end of it a sort of a box in which you can add whatever comments you want if you feel there are areas that haven't been covered, in whatever ways you feel you need, it will be helpful to make additional comments. But if I could make a plea through here to ask as many of you as feel able to complete these forms, it really does help as part of the process, so we can come back to you in September with recommendations about which we feel confident. I think, is that anything else on this item? Claire, your hand's up. Is that a sort of residual hand or a new comment?
Sorry, it's a residual one. I'll take it down now.
Right. Back to you, Andy, then.
Well, I think it's, and the next one then is you again, I think, isn't it? Holding Neds to account.
Yeah. I think this is just the normal reports that we provide. We tend to deal with it by exception. Again, the opportunity for any colleagues who wish to raise any particular points. You have got within this, and Ray may want to come back on some discussions that he and I and Andy and others have been involved in about the what actually is the role of governors attending board meetings and board subcommittees. And as a result of that, Sally has drafted a note which is attached on, I'm just trying to work out the page number here. I can't, on my system, it's not showing page numbers, but about a page and a half at the end of the report as an appendix, which I think sort of updates and clarifies some of the key points about the role that we have as governors when we attend board meetings and board subcommittees. So again, happy to take questions, or if any colleagues who've attended anything they want to flag up wish to do so, please do so. I've seen Ray, you're up to say something.
And you're right, I have had a chat with you and Andy and Simon Hiller. And I think because of what's happened today, I think I've changed my mind to a degree, because today we had the pre-meeting with NEDS, and I thought that was hugely useful. And I think if that's now an integral part of these council governors meetings, that goes to a long way to opening up that dialogue between governors and NEDS. The only other thing I'd say, Richard, is that when governors attend the board or when they attend committees, I think that Steve Dilworth, for me, got it the most right. So just let me repeat what he said at the start of the meeting. There were 2 or 3 governors there. He acknowledged us, he welcomed us, but he said that it would have been good for governors to have given written comments beforehand, so that the committee could have addressed them. But he also welcomed written comments after governors had heard the discussion at the end of the meeting directed to him. So I think if that happens, I think that would be great. So in summary, governors can raise concerns at council governors meetings, as we've done today, or ahead of a committee or board meeting, we can send comments in to chairs, and that's worked very well for me in the last few weeks. But also, having heard the discussion, governors can also send in written comments. And I've had some really good interactions with Nina, Suzanne, and with Steve round about that. And I think the key point, Richard, is that governors have got a wealth of experience. And why wouldn't the non-execs want to tap into that one way or another? So that's my halfpennyworth. Thanks.
Thanks, Ray, and I totally take on board what you've said. I think one of the things we're very lucky at Oxley's, and I talk to colleagues from other foundation trusts around the country, we have a much more transparent and an open approach to what the governors are involved in than most other trusts, and I think very grateful for that. Obviously, I have to retire by rule in a few months' time, and I will no longer be a governor, and I will miss desperately not being engaged in Oxleys in the way that I have been for the last 9 years, and it will be for all of you to take forward that that process. But the one point I would make, I think today was extremely useful, but I would make the point that the NEDs do have an awful lot of other responsibilities, and maybe to bring them together quite in that way at every before every Council of Governors meeting is maybe asking a little too much of them. But I think certainly it's something that we've learnt a lot from today, and something that ought to be happening at least occasionally, although I feel that doing it before every Council of Governors meeting may be just asking a little bit too much of them. Right. Anything else on that item? I can't see any other hands up. Sally?
I just wanted to ask with the governors whether we should have a limit to the number of governors that attend and observe the meetings. Because I think when we had face-to-face meetings, we were aiming for up to, I think, either 2 or 3 governors to attend the meetings. Obviously, with virtual ones, the practical issues are slightly different. And I just wanted to get an idea from people for sort of practical purposes, if we had a maximum of 3 governors, what do people think, or would they prefer it to be completely open?
I can understand where you've got a face-to-face meeting, the limitation. I think, Sally, you and I will recall that actually our struggle until a year or so ago was often to even get every meeting covered by a governor. And I think what's been absolutely fantastic over the last year or so has been the willingness of governors to attend the meetings. And I think it may be part of the move to virtual meetings generally, because I know other organisations which similarly say meetings are far better attended than they used to be in virtual format. It'll be interesting to see if we go back to face-to-face meetings, whether there will still be the numbers available. But it will be for maybe others to decide rather than me on the numbers they feel are appropriate to be there. Anybody else?
I think we had Sue there, then Rebecca.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Andy and Richard. I think the beauty of, I know one of the things that, or some of the things that have come out of COVID is actually moving forward, being able to be involved more, perhaps in meetings than we were as governors before, because of the reduction in numbers and space. So there is a balance to get it right, isn't there? That so governors still feel involved, but obviously when we go back to face-to-face meetings, it's the limitation on space and how many people you can get there. And as much as it's lovely seeing everyone on screen, I can't wait till when we get back to some face-to-face meetings. So I think we have to have a balance of, if we've got a face-to-face meeting, it's X number of governors, and if we end up doing virtual meetings for a bit longer, I don't know how easy it is for the people chairing these meetings to control the numbers, but at least we can see one another. So it's getting the balance right for the future, whatever that future might be, I think. And I don't know if there's any right answer at the moment, given we're not quite sure when we'll be going back to face-to-face meetings, with the dates and when we're opening up slightly changing every so often. So thank you.
Right. Sorry, there was somebody else, but I can't remember who it was now. It was
yeah. Hi, Richard. It's Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
Thank you for that, Sally. That's a really interesting point. I have to say that the virtual meetings have been a real revelation. I can remember driving down to Pinewood to attend meetings and sort of battling the traffic, and that has made a huge difference. So we make a recommendation as a joint collective group of governors, not as a personal one, but from my perspective as a personal one, I could say that online, providing that it's important that you know who's attending, and as Richard said, we've got more than one governor attending each of the meetings. I don't see a reason for a limitation if people feel that they want to attend, but the physical meetings will will have to be within COVID guidelines, and that's a whole different set of parameters really. But it has been much improved to just be able to turn the computer on and to attend those meetings in the way that Sue's just highlighted.
Not sure we've totally answered your question.
Well, no, I think I've taken away from that generally no limit unless there's a particular circumstance that requires that, either practical issues or COVID issues or whatever.
I think if I may come in now, I think this is really interesting. Firstly, I just want to thank all the governors for the interest that you show, and you really do enrich things. Some of the questions that you ask are nearly always absolutely spot on. It really does make a big difference. And I think we've got a Council of Governors now who are more lively, more interested, I think, than we've ever had before, which is a massive plus point, I think, for the organisation. Echoing Richard's point, I do believe, as did my predecessor, that we should be as open as we possibly can and engage and let everybody come in. We've got nothing to hide. And I think it's absolutely right that we have governors attend whatever they want to attend. I think there's a couple of issues we need to be thinking about. I do wonder about the locations of some of our meetings, which we can't actually get that many more people in. So that might mean we might have to move. I don't like the cost of going to the hotels, but you take the meeting room at Pinewood, it's very tight. If you get more than a couple of governors and the odd strange member of the public who turns up and we all question them as to how they found their way in. I mean, these are public meetings, aren't they? They should be allowed to be there. And I think that's something we need to reflect on. But also echoing Rebecca's point, there's been some real pluses about being online. Not just for these meetings, but all sorts of meetings. And you're not fighting your way across South East London to go to the meeting, the environmental, the cost, and all those issues. So I think whether we end up going for, it's the Council of Governors' decision for various meetings, but whether we go for a mix. But I miss the face-to-face. And Ray mentioned about the pre-meet, because we used to have pre-meets all the time. And we could mill around, have a coffee, have a sandwich, and a lot of the discussions were in the margins. And afterwards as well, when you break up and have a little chat about things and issues that are being raised, I really do miss that, because I do feel that we've had a very challenging and a very supportive Council of Governors. I think that's absolutely right. John, please.
I think, Andy, as a member of the NHS Ethics Committee, they have come out clearly with a very clear statement that going back to face-to-face meetings is not going to happen. We're working online going forward, with a view that there would be perhaps a yearly training event that might have the option of getting people together. So I just see it as a trust board and governor that actually quite shortly we'll have to make that decision, or at least have that more in-depth discussion. I would question, we have gained so many skills in working online that, in a sense, trying to keep people satisfied to go back, to me, is an option we'll have to deal with quite soon.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we'll have to challenge it internally as well. We'll have to really get to grips with it sometime or other. Every time we try and arrange something, we get pushed back and the decision for us. But yes, we do. We really do need to think about how we're going to carry on in the future, because there have been just so many pluses. The working day seems to go later and later, which I don't think suits everybody, as we stuff more and more meetings into. But anyway, I do miss seeing people face to face. I think there's been so many pluses for that as well. Right, Richard, this is still your item. Are we done?
I think we are. I can't see anybody else up there. The only other thing I would say is I think people have seen the latest list circulated by Anne-Marie on who's volunteered for meetings over the next quarter. I think there are very few, if any, gaps left on there. All I would stress, if anybody who has put their name down and said they want to attend a meeting and then finds for whatever reason they can't, if they could let Anne-Marie or myself know, so that we can make sure that there is some cover just in case. But very grateful for colleagues for being so willing to go along to the meetings. I think we've learned so much by attending them.
Definitely.
I think that finishes this item, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed. Rebecca, membership.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I'm aware of the time because we were due to finish at 5 o'clock. So as Andy was saying earlier, our working day gets later, but it's variety. Our last membership committee, we met on the 6th of May. And our next one in my diary, we are due to meet again on the 24th of June. I have to say, this last 6 months or longer has been very, very productive, and our thanks go to all the governors that have been participating in these meetings. So Tina Stack has kindly stepped up and offered to be the chair of our communications working group, and it's just we're looking at how we can particularly improve the communications with how we communicate with our members. There's some detail in your handout sheets, and Tina has invited.
You've gone on mute, Rebecca.
My apologies. My apologies. I'm not quite sure how long I've been on mute. So Tina has put a note out on the chat to say that their next meeting for the communications group is on Monday, the 21st of June, 12:45 to 1:45, and all are welcome to attend. And that is essentially about looking at how we communicate with our members. And engage with our members. There's also Simon is chairing the Member and Public Engagement Working Group, and that's an informal meeting which is looking at understanding how our representative role is, and to reflect on what would be most help to the governors to undertake it. So Simon and our governor colleagues are participating in that. 8 governors had volunteered to join that working group, and that's ongoing as well. We're just reviewing the membership strategy because it's a 3-year strategy, and we are developing a new strategy which will be presented to the Council of Governors in the next September meeting. And also my chair term comes to an end, and I'm standing down, and we're looking to elect a new chair as well. So if anyone wants to email me or contact me about any questions about that, or Joe or Anne-Marie, that's absolutely fine. And our annual members meeting is Wednesday the 29th of September. So I wondered, Simon's not able to take any questions. He's had to dash, I'm afraid, but any questions that he might have can go to be noted down and go through Joe or Anne-Marie. And were there any questions for Tina about the communications working group as well, or anything to do with the membership committee? Is that a hand?
Yeah, I think there's Liz Moss with a hand up, I think.
Okay.
Liz?
Not me. No, not me.
No, not yet. Leslie?
Sorry.
Hi, Rebecca.
I've got a hand. Yeah, Leslie, have you got your hand up?
Yeah.
Hello.
I know that the work is being done with Charlton Athletic, and that's where you're kind of piloting the initial stage.
Yeah.
Does this strategy include the progression of that to a wider group, or is it purely focusing at the moment on Charlton Athletic?
Well, at the moment, it's a good question, because we've got a partnership going with Charlton Athletics, and because we've been focusing on getting younger members engaged. That's been one of the paths that we've been looking at recently, but there's absolutely no reason why looking at the new membership strategy coming up, we can take that to our next meeting and, you know, make sure that we do open it up. I think it's a good idea.
Anything else for Rebecca? Jo, please.
Yes, thanks, Andy. Can I just come in on the back of that, Leslie, just to let you know, we're working, Cole's on the call, been working with Cole just to get some feedback from young people about what membership may look like, to actually shape what offer and what would be of interest to young people for the wider young people's membership. And we're actually working with some colleges as well, which Simon will update you on as a future meeting, to work with them to actually develop some campaigns working with young people. So it's not distinctly with Charlton Athletics, working with them to actually define what young people's membership may look like for the wider population.
Thanks, Jo. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, if there's nothing else, then Rebecca, thanks ever so much for the work that you've been doing. I know these tasks can be pretty onerous on occasions, and you know, finding your replacement, we'll have to start work on that straight away, won't we? Anyway, thanks very much, Rebecca. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
The next two items are yours, Sally.
Thank you. So the first item I've got is an update on the elections to the Council of Governors. And since the paper was written, we've had a notice from our external election providers about who's been elected unopposed, and we've published the information on our website. But just to say that Joseph Hopkins, Sue Sauter, Liz Moss, Tina Strack, Steve Pleasance, Ravimbo Mutabunzi, Francis Murray and Claire Wheeler have all been re-elected to the Council of Governors unopposed. And we are going to elections in the Greenwich Public constituency, the Greenwich Adult Staff constituency, and the Staff Forensic and Prison constituency. So those elections will be going underway with the close of election on the 19th of July, and we'll be able to declare the results on the 20th of July. That process will then be followed very quickly by the lead governor election process, as we've discussed previously. But I know Richard, and if anyone's got any queries for me, be very happy to talk about the lead governor role, and there's information available on what that covers. And just sort of quick aspect about the annual members meeting. Yes, we have a holding date of Wednesday the 29th of September at the moment. There is a slight caveat in that for the annual members meeting we will present our annual report. Now we have to have taken the annual report to Parliament before we are able to share it with the wider membership and public, and there's still waiting for guidance of when that timing will be. I'm expecting it will be early September, and therefore the timings will work out, but I just wanted to flag up that might be an issue, and whether we have a virtual one as we did last year or are able to do something face to face, obviously we will keep the situation under review and make some decisions probably in the next few weeks, and obviously talk with the membership committee and wider Council of Governors on that. Just wondered if there are any questions from anyone. No?
Okay, Sally.
I will then move on to the next item. So this was requested by one of the governors to come to the Council of Governors meeting. So every year we self-certify as a foundation trust about various aspects of governance of our compliance with the provider licence. So each provider under what was Monitor has a licence that covers a number of different areas, and also there's the NHS Foundation Trust Code of Governance, and it's really going through making sure that we are aware of the different aspects of these documents, and that we are complying with them. So this was taken, we went to the board in May and then was deferred to the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee for sign-off. There is, although a lot of the elements actually relate to how the Council of Governors and the board works, there was one specific area where the Council of Governors opinions needed to be taken into account, and that was around training available for governors. And that was, as you'll remember, we discussed at the meeting last time at the Council of Governors. So the templates, which are right at the back of the pack, are the things that we are asked to publish on our website, giving information about what we've looked at. And the charts that are in the pack are really where basically I've gone through the information that's in the Code of Governance and aspects of the Constitution and the contract and the provider licence to look at where we generally it's where we report on that information or make sure that we comply with that information. So the chart kind of goes through the issue and then how we've dealt with that. And our annual report is very much where we contain the information and share that more broadly with the public. You'll see on the template that broadly we confirm with aspects. The only caveat that we've put in at this stage is around the finances. So one of the questions on the template is basically, are you confident going ahead that you have the finances to deliver all the services that you are commissioned or bound to deliver? And as Azra mentioned earlier in the meeting, some of the information about the part 2 of the year, it has not been released as yet. So whilst we're confident and all the indications are there that we will have the funding to do this, we haven't actually had the full detail yet, and therefore that's why the wording's in there, just to say that the full position's not clear as yet due to the COVID pandemic and the way the funding's changed over the last year. So we are anticipating that things will be fine, but just the caveat that if the situation was different when the part 2 of the year funding comes out, then we'll have to look at that situation. So I hope that clarifies that. So that's an overview. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Sally at all? If not, I'm very grateful. Thanks very much. Ray, please.
We can't hear you, Ray.
I think you're on mute, Ray. Oh, Ray, we seem to have lost you. One more try, Ray. Nope, still lost you. Okay. Well, anyone else? Ray, we can't hear you. No. Okay. All right. Thanks very much. I haven't been notified of any other business, but is there anything urgent from anybody else before we pack up?
No.
No, if not, but just a huge thank you to you. I thought it was a terrific meeting. A lot in there. We've got through an awful lot today. So big thanks to the executive and all of your staff. Big thanks to the NEDs for coming to the pre-meet as well, which I thought was really useful. But most of all, thank you to all of you. I think it made it a really, really good meeting, and I'm very grateful. And Joe and Anne-Marie and Sally for all the support you give to the Council of Governors and the work you do behind the scenes. So very grateful for that. So, anyway, that's it. Thanks very much indeed. Hope to see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.